Assalamu alaikum, everyone. Welcome back. I'm Jake, the Muslim Metaphysician. And first of all, before we get started, I want to say Ramadan Mubarak to all of the Muslims out there that are watching now and that will be watching this video in the future, inshallah. I want to start off by saying that I hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will accept our fasts. Tomorrow is, at least for us here in the US, will be the first day of fasting. And so we pray that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will accept our fasts and our worship, our ibadah. Now, today, I have this video, which is going to be on the Aqeedah of a Muslim by the name of Dr. Jonathan A.C. Brown. So I don't know how many people who watch my channel know Dr. Brown in his work. I have no idea. But he's a part of an organization which is called the Yaqeen Institute, which is based here in Texas in the US. And he, from what I understand, his specialization is supposed to be in Hadith studies. Okay. He recently did a podcast on a YouTube channel, which is called The Thinking Muslim. And it was mainly supposed to be on Hadith. And actually, the title of the video is called What Orientalists and Modernists Get Wrong. Okay. Now, there's been, from what I see on Twitter and YouTube and other places, there's been a lot of criticism of Dr. Brown and some things he said in the past. I'm not even going to go into those other issues, but there have been other issues that have been mentioned. I do want to say at the outset that I spoke to Dr. Brown on my Twitter thread, which is how this initially got started, and I'll explain why I chose to do a video actually in the long run. But yeah, so one second here. All right, just making sure this is correct. Yeah, so on my Twitter, I did get a chance to speak to Dr. Brown on the thread, but unfortunately, it wasn't a lengthy discussion, and I don't have any contact with him besides that. So that was the extent of which I got a chance to speak to Dr. Brown on the issue that we're going to discuss today, inshallah. I want to say at the outset that this is not an attack. I know it might appear such, and maybe even to some people who saw my tweet, this is not an attack on Dr. Brown, that I have some kind of vendetta against him. Not at all. Mainly, I watched a video and I was quite surprised by a certain section, which I'm going to play from the interview without skipping over any parts, because some people said that I maybe edited the video and there could be some possible misrepresentation in what Jonathan Brown had to say. There was no misrepresentation at all. In fact, if you included more context, you would see that from my perspective, it actually was worse than it appeared in the short video that I posted. So, look, I don't have any personal beef with Dr. Brown at all. Never spoken to him before this. I'm not really interested in that, having any personal issue with him. Whatever his aqeedah actually is, it is. And that's not my main concern. My main concern actually is him being a public figure and making these kind of statements on YouTube. And then when I'm sort of questioning him about some of it, once he begins to engage on Twitter, he's not very clear about his positions, right? Which I find a bit strange, because he's very outspoken about being a Hanbali when it comes to fiqh. But when it comes to Aqeedah, it seems that he doesn't want to clearly mention what view he holds to. It's clearly not an Athari. He seems to be an Ashari, from my perspective, and what he says in the video. So I'm going to play the video But before I play the video, I want to share my screen and show you guys the thread on Twitter where this kind of started. Obviously, it started by me watching the video, but then I posted a clip from it on my Twitter account. Okay, as you see here, this is on March 14th. On my Twitter account, I said, unfortunately, Jonathan A.C. Brown, I tagged him, does not represent the views of Ahl al-Hadith on the topics mentioned. Inshallah, he is willing to reconsider what is mentioned here and speak to reputable Athari scholars about these issues. And one of them that I mentioned is Sheikh Hatem al-Hajj. And one of the main reasons I mentioned him is because he's in the U.S. and maybe him and Dr. Brown have some contact and they could speak about these things. And I'm going to actually play later on a recent video from Sheikh Hatem al-Hajj, which was on Blogging Theology, where he speaks about Imam Bukhari's position about a specific issue. And I'll explain why I'm going to mention that. So I'm not even going to play the video because I'm going to go through the original clip here, but I just want to show you some of the things he said here on the thread. So he says, the issue has been disagreed on by scholars more knowledgeable than I. Okay, fine. So one could either choose a position or lay out of the disagreement in full. So he's given two options for himself. Look, this is a disagreed upon issue supposedly among scholars. A person could either choose a position, meaning either choose the Athari position or the Ashari position, right? Obviously, it's more complex than that, but I'm just giving simplified understanding here. Or lay out the disagreement in full, meaning explain what the disagreement is in full and maybe stay out of it or not really mention your position or whatever. He said the latter would require its own podcast. Fair enough. I agree with that in order to explain what the Ashari position is, what the Athari or Ahl Hadith position is, and why each different perspective is held, and who held these positions and why did they hold them. All of those details, I agree, would require a lot more time. I'm not expecting him to do that, okay? And he says, though some may disagree, he said the latter would require its own podcast. And though some may disagree, I said what I thought best. Meaning he didn't go with the second option of explaining everything in detail, but he did state his position and what he thought is the position of the majority of scholars, okay, which is disputed. He chose a position and he mentioned what he's holding to, okay? So now I responded to him. I said, to be clear, Jonathan Brown, you are free to believe whatever you wish, meaning, look, you're free to believe whatever you want. It's not really about that, at least from my point of view. However, my concern was mentioning Imam Bukhari and Imam Ahmed in the context of being the interlocutors of the Mu'tazila. And you'll understand what I mean by this. He mentions Imam Bukhari and Imam Ahmed specifically in arguing against the so-called rationalists or the Mu'tazila. And then following that up with, Sunni theologians respond with, and I say, gives the impression that the view expressed was the view of Imam Ahmed and Imam Bukhari, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy on them both, which it clearly wasn't. Okay, which is my claim, and I'm going to establish that. Now, if you agree with those views mentioned in the video and you are an Ash'ari, that's your choice. But I think it's best to state that clearly, meaning I have two major problems here. One, in the context of mentioning the so-called views of the traditionalists, okay? And he mentions Imam Bukhari and Imam Ahmed by name, in contrast to the Mu'tazila. And then he said, so Sunni theologians say this. Well, he makes it seem like he's talking about Imam Bukhari and Imam Ahmed, right? So that's the first problem, which they didn't hold that view, the views that he then goes on to mention. He says, yes, I should have clarified that by theologians in that case, I did not intend Imam Ahmed. So he's agreeing that Imam Ahmed did not actually have those views expressed, which he's claiming to be Hanbali, but yet he's not adhering to the position of Imam Ahmed. Now you can say, well, that's his Imam in fiqh, but that's not his Imam in Aqeedah. And that's been done before. Sometimes there have been some Hanbalis in fiqh that have been Ash'aris, but very, very few and far between. Most of them who follow the Imam in terms of fiqh also follow him in terms of his Aqeedah and his positions on this. They would not be saying what Jonathan Brown was saying. And then he says, and Bukhari is debatable. So I was a bit unclear about what he meant by that, meaning he thinks that maybe Imam Bukhari actually held some of these views and leaned towards more of the, and it's anachronistic to say Ash'ari because Imam Bukhari clearly was not an Ash'ari, but meaning that he would have expressed similar views that later Ash'aris held to, or the ones that are mentioned in the video. Okay, so I asked him, I said, Bukhari is, and notice he didn't mention, so he mentioned the first part of my concern, but he didn't mention the second part, which was, listen, Dr. Brown, excuse me, Dr. Brown, and I don't mean that in a disrespectful way, Dr. Brown, if you agree with the views mentioned in the video and you're an Ash'ari, I think it's appropriate as a public figure and academic that you are, and that you're on public platforms on YouTube and other places, even in person teaching people, that you should make your position clear, right? You've said over and over again that you're Hanbali when it comes to fiqh. But if you're an Ash'ari, and maybe I missed it, because to be fair, I haven't watched a lot of Dr. Brown's content and read a lot of his material to know, you know, whether or not he's explicitly stated his position. And that's why I asked him, okay? But if he is an Ash'ari, or he claims to be Athari, that would be even more of a problem, because what he states in the video contradicts, and he seems to admit that, the position of Imam Ahmed, right, and Ahl al-Hadith. Okay? Then he just stay so, whatever his position is, right? That's one of my main gripes, is that I think Dr. Brown, if you happen to see this video later, or for his followers, he should just state clearly what his position is. No, I'm not saying that you have to agree with me. Who am I, right? Or and if you know Imam Ahmed's position and you want to reject it, I don't think that's correct. I don't think that's the right move to make. But nobody's holding a gun to his head, right? That's not what this video is about. That's not what my thread was about. It was to get clarity on the issue, to say, listen, this is what you said. I'm kind of surprised by what you said. What actually is your position? And he wasn't very clear about that. So he answered about Imam Ahmed and Imam Bukhari. And when he says Bukhari is debatable, I said, Bukhari is debatable in what sense? What do you mean by that? As to whether or not that was his view, meaning what you expressed in the video? And he never replied to that. Also, if you don't consider yourself Athari or Ahl al-Hadith in terms of Aqeedah, could you please clarify that? So I ask again, as a scholar speaking about these issues publicly, I think it's important to be transparent. I think that's fair, right? And from our tradition, of course, it's extremely fair that you should be stating your position clearly, okay? And then he never went on to actually respond to that, okay? Never went on to clarify that in any way. I don't know what this, you know, some people are talking in the chat, addressing me. Again, most people know when I do these live streams, and if I'm reading from the screen or in the zone, I don't engage too much with the chat. By the way, wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh to everybody giving salams in the chat. Yeah, so it's upon him as a public figure, right, an academic and scholar, to be explicit and clear and transparent in what his positions are. Okay, when especially on these major issues of Aqeedah, all right, which I gave him several times and he doesn't want to. So now I'm making this video to, you know, discuss the Aqeedah of Dr. Jonathan Brown, and I only have to go off of what he says in the video, and I think it speaks for itself that he's clearly not ethity, and he didn't deny that. He even agreed that the position of Imam Ahmed is not in line with what he said. I don't know what he meant by Bukhari being debatable, but as we'll see that Bukhari is not on the manhaj of the Asharis, right? He agrees with us, and I'm going to show even some of the scholars from the Ashari and Mataridi tradition agree with the fact that Imam Bukhari did not hold their position, and that he was on the position of the Atharis, and agrees with Ibn Taymiyyah, right? And I'm going to show that from a recent presentation done by, inshallah, by Sheikh Hatem al-Hajj. Okay, so let's go to this video that we're talking about. It's about 12, the section that's relevant is about 12 minutes long. So I'm going to go through that, stop at some key points and respond. And then I'm going to go to the other video from Sheikh Hatem al-Hajj, inshallah, and explain, play that, and obviously give some commentary on that. And the reason why the next part is important for me personally, so it's not necessarily only to do with Dr. Brown and his position, but some people have asked me, Jake, why are you an ethity? And the second issue when we talk, when I play the clip from Sheikh Hatem al-Hajj, is the main reason for me personally why I'm an ethity, because the ethity school in Aqeedah is the only one with the position that will be expressed in that video. The Asharis don't agree with it. The Mataridis don't agree with it. The so-called philosophers don't agree with it. The Mu'tazila don't agree with it. It's the only position that is held by the ethity school. And it is so clearly in the Qur'an, as we'll see, the language supports it, reason supports it, and I just couldn't imagine taking one of the other positions. Okay, not to say that there aren't other reasons, but for me personally, that's the main reason why I am ethity in terms of key issues amongst the different schools. Okay, obviously, I believe because it's in line with the Qur'an and Sunnah. That's the first point, and what the Salaf actually taught. And we'll make that clear in just a bit. 1 second. Somebody's saying that Mahir Amir doesn't clarify what his Aqeedah is. This is honestly, I have to just stop here and get a quick Ramadan laugh at this. That my friend Mahir Amir, which he is my friend, you're saying that he hasn't clarified his position? I'm sorry, sir, but I guess you're not aware of the fact that he actually wrote an entire book on Aqeedah, right? That is over 1,000 pages long, explaining what his Aqeedah is, arguing for it, and arguing against the Aqeedah of the Asharis. So he's an ethity in Aqeedah, okay? So it seems like you have no idea what you're talking about. To make such a statement like that, anyone who knows Mahir Amir, who is my friend, would just laugh at such a statement. Anyway, let me, instead of wasting time with such silly comments in the chat, let me go to the video here. Here's the video. All right, so it's about 12 minutes long. I'm going to pause as we go along, inshallah.
So it's not just that we're saying a hadith. So a hadith contradicts the Quran. It contradicts the established sunnah of the Prophet. Yeah. It contradicts first principles of reason. It can't be something the Prophet said, because the Prophet is not going to say something illogical, right? Or something impossible. Fine.
And in principle, we agree with that. That's fine. It can't go against the Quran. It can't go against the established reason, and it can't go against established facts and reason, right? Like we can't be talking about square circles and stuff like that. But however, and what we'll see here in just a second is what the Ash'aris, and this is key that we need to understand, what they mean by reason or established aqli principles is what we disagree with. We don't have a problem with aql because we don't believe, and our position is that reason can never contradict the authentic sunnah, nor can it contradict the Quran, and vice versa. It's always in line, the text and sound reason, a sound aql, are always in agreement. They can never go against each other. Okay, they're not pit against each other. However, what the Ash'aris understand certain rational principles to be, and we'll go over one of them in due time in this video, we don't agree that that's actually a legitimate rational principle, right? So that's where the difference is. But in principle, we agree with that. We can't accept a hadith that goes against the Quran, that it goes against the established sunnah, or that contradicts reason. Okay.
Here's the problem. So that's an approach to hadith criticism that all Muslim scholars agree with.
Yes.
You can go back to, you know, the early Muslim rationalists, the Mu'tazilites. They were big on this. You can go back to their opponents, the early Sunnis, like Ibn Hanbal. They might not say this, but they also agree with this. If you go and look in.
So he says Ahmed ibn Hanbal agrees with that. Okay, nope. And he says, well, he doesn't provide a quote, but sure, in principle, we don't have a problem.
Early Sunni books of hadith criticism, where they're actually laying out the rules that are written in like the 1000s. They'll say any hadith that contradicts the Quran, contradicts the established sunnah of the Prophet, it contradicts reason, it can't be something the Prophet said.
Right.
Okay. So that's one approach. Everybody agrees with it, but here's the problem. It's very hard in practice. Very hard in practice. Why? Imagine I tell you this. I say, here's a hadith. I'm pretty sure it's in the. I think it might be in the Musnad of Ahmad ibn Hanbal, but I can't be sure. I'm not sure. It's an early hadith, but it's not in a main collection.
Right.
That the Prophet said, I was shown God in the shape of an amrad. Amrad is a beardless youth, a young beautiful boy. The Prophet said, I was shown God in the shape of a young beautiful youth. Oh, right? That's interesting. So early Muslim rationalists, like the Mu'tazilites, this is ridiculous. This can't be something the Prophet said. Why?
And he keeps calling the Mu'tazila rationalists, and this is something that's very popular in Western academia. I don't like this at all because I don't think they're rational at all, the Mu'tazili creed. But anyway, it's not something to nitpick on.
The Quran says, "Laysa kamithlihi shay." There's nothing like unto God. He's the one who perceives you. You don't perceive. You don't have basar, perception of God.
Yes.
Okay. Let alone he's like a beardless youth. I mean, maybe you see like light or something. I mean, whatever. But I mean, this is absurd. It clearly contradicts the Quran.
Yes.
Okay. Some early Sunnis, it's not that they agree with the idea of this hadith, but what they really don't like is people superpower.
So he says, not that they agree. Now he goes on to say, not that they agree with the idea of this hadith, which isn't necessarily true, right? Well, this hadith is disputed in terms of his authenticity, which I'm going to get to in just a second. And I'm going to explain those who think it's authentic, what their position actually is, like Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah.
Powering their reason. Right. So what they say is, you know, Mu'tazilites, early Muslim rationalists, you know, what do you know? Like, you don't know the nature of God. Like, you don't know the unseen realm of the ghaib, you know? And what does the Quran say about earlier communities? They go astray when they start to speculate about God. They start to go away from revelation and start to like invent their own forms. They start to like do theology and speculation and all these things.
Yes.
So we need to stick to the sunnah of the Prophet. We don't know the nature of God. We only know what the Quran tells us. If the Prophet tells us this, we really don't have, we're not in a position to say this contradicts the Quran because he's the one explaining the Quran to us. So if he says this, we don't actually have the right to kind of dissent to it. Okay?
Yes. Yeah.
Now,
and of course, we agree with this part in the sense that if it is an authentic hadith or if it is in the Quran, right? As I already said, it cannot, once it's established in line with authentic sunnah, right? It's not going to contradict already established sunnah. It's not going to contradict Qur'an, and it's not going to contradict the aql. It's not going to contradict reason, right? So if we establish that it actually is from the Prophet, alayhi salatu wassalam, right? We're going to accept it, right?
Other Sunni scholars, very senior Sunni scholars like Al-Dhahabi, say this hadith is ridiculous. Of course it's ridiculous. First of all, the chain of transmission is not that strong. Second of all, you know, you exactly what we said before, you can't see this contradicts the Quran.
Yes.
Some Sunni scholars like Mullah Ali Qari is a famous scholar from Mecca, originally from Herat. He died in 1606, sorry, Common Era. He says, maybe the Prophet saw it in a dream. And you know, you can see whatever in a dream. The other day I had a dream and I saw.
And by the way, it wasn't something he made up, right? Because Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah said that, and many other scholars before him already mentioned this idea. of it being in a dream.
Like a giant hamburger walking around or something. That doesn't mean so. Whatever. I'm not responsible for this. It's a dream. You can see like there's a lot of some scholars are kind of trying to figure out ways to accept it. Some scholars are clearly saying no, it's unacceptable.
But why are they trying to do that when the isnad is unreliable?
Okay, let's use a different example. It's maybe like more helpful in this regard.
Okay, so now he tries to go to a different. Tries to go to a different issue. So this is the first. This is the first hadith and first issue that I want to deal with. This idea of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam supposedly seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a youth in a dream, right? And he's saying that the Mu'tazila and many scholars rejected this idea because it goes against laysa kamithlihi shay, right? The idea that you're basically making similitude with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're guilty of tashbih, right? Somebody's asking me my aqeedah. If you haven't been watching the video and paying attention, I've said several times I'm an athari, right? An aqeedah. Now, anyway, back to the hadith. So this hadith, I will admit that there is dispute even amongst Ahl al-Hadith about whether or not this hadith is authentic. That's the first thing. Fine, no problem, right? In that sense. Now, for example, Sheikh al-Albani rejected this hadith, right? Sheikh al-Albani rejected the hadith. Ibn al-Jawzi rejected the hadith. Shawkani rejected hadith. We can name numerous scholars. I think he mentioned al-Dhahabi did not accept the hadith, and so on, based on not only its chain but also its matan, the content of the hadith, right? That's what he was claiming that Imam al-Dhahabi said. Now, what I'm going to say, okay, if you want to take the position and criticize the chain of narration, fine, no problem. But for those Sunni scholars that actually accepted hadith, like Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah, and I've explained this in another video before, they said it was in a dream, right? So this is from Ibn Taymiyyah. He says this, and all of them, speaking about the narrations, contain what indicates that this was in a dream, and that it took place in Medina, except for the narration of Ikramah, right? Because there are different chains of this hadith. On the authority of Ibn Abbas, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pleased with him. And then he says, Imam Ahmed made the two narrations as one, and so the scholar said, and he continues on. Again, he said that this narration that Ahmed ordered to narrate, it was made clear that it was a dream, right? So Imam Ahmed ordered for this to be narrated, right? And it was made clear that it was a dream. Now, some people may say, well, even if it is a dream, it's still problematic. It's still problematic because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, astaghfirullah, is not actually a young boy or looks anything like that. We agree with that part, that that's not what it is, right? And that's why Shaykh al-Islam explains it. He says, we do not believe that what a person imagines in his sleep or wakefulness is from images that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his essence is like that, full stop. Even if it's a dream, we don't believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is anything like a young boy that appeared in the dream, if it happened. We don't believe that. He himself is not like that. So anybody who wants to mock and laugh and say, ha ha ha, you guys believe that Allah is a young boy. No, we don't believe that. He himself is not like that. Rather, it is the same for the essence of the jinn and the angels, which man cannot envision and imagine it as it is in reality. Rather, it is different from what he imagines and forms in his sleep and his wakefulness. So it doesn't matter if you're awake it doesn't matter if you're awake or It's not what you think, right? And then he says, this is Ibn Taymiyyah. So listen closely to anybody who wants to misrepresent, because there have been people on other platforms who have been doing this recently as well. Ibn Taymiyyah says, it is not permissible, it is haram for a person to believe that Allah himself is like that, meaning like that image, what you have seen in your dream. Not only this dream about the young boy, but any dream. It is haram. It is impermissible to believe that Allah himself looks like that or has any of this qualities and features. No. That's not what it is. Now, to show that this is not only the position of, to show that this is really not an issue between, necessarily anyway, the Atharis and Ash'aris, I'm going to show you even As-Suyuti said the same thing, who is a well-known Sufi Ash'ari. What did he say? He comments on this hadith saying, if this narration is carried out as a dream, then there is no issue in that. So As-Suyuti himself, who's an Ash'ari, commented on this hadith and said that if it is carried out as a dream, if we understand it as a dream, then there's no issue in that. Okay? And the reason is, and he gives the same reason basically that Shaykh al-Islam gave, because we understand that that's not how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually is. We don't believe that, right? We do not believe that. Anyway, look at all these people commenting, and listen, you guys can comment with your nonsense. Really doesn't bother me. So that's to be clear. There are some scholars which you can take that position, right? I'm not making any claims about it. If you think there's a genuine problem and you can establish it with a chain of narration that it's not authentic back to the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam, right? Then then you can take that position. Alternatively, those who authenticated it and said that it was authentic hadith, they said that this was a dream and that it is haram to actually believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is anything like that in what is dreamt. Not only in this dream, but in any other dream, right? So that's to be clear. Now let's move on to the next issue here, inshallah. Okay. Let me go back to sharing my screen and go back to this video.
So there's a hadith considered reliable chain of transmission.
So now he goes on to this another hadith,
okay, which says that God,
which is, and the reason he does is because it's supposedly more reliable. There's less dispute about its authenticity, right? So he tries to give a different hadith as another example.
In the sometime late at night, God
a house or a laptop?
Oh man,
which one do you think is worth more? Well, definitely not the house, because
descends from the highest heavens to hear the prayers of those people who are still awake. God descends from the highest heavens to hear the prayers of those people who are still awake in prayer. Okay.
This is known as the Hadith of Nuzul, where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is described with Nuzul or is said to descend, right? And he's going to explain this.
Those early Muslim rationalists, the Mu'tazilites, they reject this. Just out of
the Mu'tazila reject.
I don't care how strong the chain of transmission is. Why? If God's moving, he moves from here to here. What does that mean about God?
Yeah.
He means he's in a body.
Yeah.
Okay. Also, where is he moving around? Like, is he in creation? Is he outside in like some void or something? What, like God, if you're moving around, it means you're in space, you're in time, you're in a body, and this all contradicts how we conceptualize God.
So notice what he gives. He's talking about, and this is what the Mu'tazila and the Ash'aris and all the people that are against, right? All the people that are against Athari Aqeedah, this is what they do. They take a text and they say, if we affirm it, here's all the lawazim, all of the concomitants, all the entailments, right? This is what follows if you affirm it. If you affirm this, then you must be affirming that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is moving from one place to another, right? And presumably he's entering into creation because he's moving from here down to here and to the lowest heaven, and he's entering into creation. This is what they're claiming if you affirm the hadith on its apparent meaning. And if that's the case, if he's moving, then he's in a body. He's a body. And if he's moving and a body, then he's in time and he changes. All of this that they're getting from the hadith. Meanwhile, are we affirming all those things? We affirm all those things. And I'm going to go over what we do affirm about it in a minute.
Based on Quranic teachings.
And he says all of this contradicts the Qur'an. Where's the argument for that? Where's just by saying laysa kamithlihi shay? Everybody says laysa kamithlihi shay, right? But what is it? Well, how do you apply that? And what's the understanding and application of that, right?
They just say we reject this. Their Sunni opponents, people like Ibn Hanbal and Bukhari, would say, no, like the Prophet said this.
Okay, so listen, this is where he mentions Imam Bukhari and Imam
also,
Ahmed.
they'll say opponents, people like Ibn Hanbal and Bukhari, would say.
So he mentions the opponents of the Mu'tazila as Imam Ahmed and Imam Bukhari. And now he gives the answer.
Their Sunni opponents, people like Ibn Hanbal and Bukhari, would say, no, like the Prophet said this. What right do you have to dissent? Also, they'll say the Quran in Surah I think it's Surah Al-Fajr. It says with the angels and God on the day of judgment will come saffa and saffa. They'll come rank in rank. Right? They'll come like, but the Mu'tazilites say, no, this is allegorical. It's like the power of God is coming. It's like, okay, it's allegorical. Why don't you make this hadith allegorical too? Look, we're not saying God is like actually dropping down. In fact, Sunni theologians would say it's like it's the mercy of God that's coming down. It's almost like the metaphor of like a parent kind of leaning over their child to hear what they're saying. So it's saying God is like, come like, but the Mu'tazilites say, no, this is allegorical. It's like the power of God is coming. It's like, okay, it's allegorical. Why don't you?
So hear what he said. He says, he now mentions a verse of Qur'an where it says that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will come, right? And on the day of judgment, like such and such. And then he says, well, the Mu'tazila respond to that and in the context, remember, this is a conversation between the Mu'tazila and Imam Ahmed and Imam Bukhari. So they'll respond with this, and then the Mu'tazila say, well, this is allegorical, this is metaphorical. Listen.
But the Mu'tazilites say, no, this is allegorical. It's like the power of God is coming.
It's like the power of God is coming. It's like the power of God is coming. This is the correct understanding that the Mu'tazila then replied to Imam Ahmed and Imam Bukhari, right?
It's like, okay, it's allegorical. Why don't you make this hadith allegorical too?
So now he says, well, then presumably the response should be from them, meaning Imam Bukhari and Imam Ahmed, right? Why don't you make this hadith allegorical too? But they don't do that, right? So in the context, you said that this is going to be the response to the Mu'tazila, but they don't do that. These imams don't do that. They don't respond by saying, oh, then you should make the hadith allegorical too.
Look, we're not saying God is like actually dropping down. In fact,
so he says, we're not saying that God is like actually dropping down, as if this is what we're saying, that Imam Ahmed and Imam Bukhari believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is dropping down and going into creation, into the lowest heaven. As if that's the only alternative. It's either you need to accept that or accept that it's metaphorical or allegorical. No, we're rejecting both of those. We're not saying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is entering into his creation, right? And we're also not saying that it's allegorical or metaphorical, as you want to say.
Sunni theologians would say it's like it's the mercy.
So now he says the Sunni theologians, and in the context, remember this conversation between Imam Ahmed, Imam Bukhari, and the Mu'tazila.
Of God is coming down. It's almost like the metaphor.
So he says, he gives ta'wil of it, right? Which is what the Asharis do. They say that this is like the mercy of God coming down.
For like a parent kind of leaning over their child to hear what they're saying. So
it's a metaphor for a parent leaning over a child to hear what they're saying, right? This is what he's describing.
We're not saying God moves. It's just metaphorical,
yes,
right? So when
he's saying we're not saying that God moves, right? So it's either you need to accept that God moves or God is moving and entering into creation, or it's allegorical and metaphorical. Who said that those are the only two options? You see, this is what the assumption is.
You say, God's eyes are on us. We don't literally think God has eyes like human.
And now he's saying, and when we say that, when we understand that, now he goes into a different verse, which is mentioned in the Quran, and it's also mentioned in Hadith about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala having eyes. When we say Allah's eyes are upon us, right?
Cool. Yes. Right. So when we say, God's eyes are on us, we don't literally think God has eyes. Like,
we don't literally think God has eyes. He's denying that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has eyes, which Imam Ahmed clearly states, right? And this is clearly not the position of Imam Ahmed and Imam Bukhari. Yes, we affirm the eyes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but we don't say that they're like our eyes, and we don't say they're body parts or anything of that kind of sort at all. We don't say that. So again, it's this false dichotomy that you must accept this understanding of tashbih that these people have in order to accept the text and what it actually says. Or you must change it and manipulate it and make that wheel into this different understanding that's allegorical and metaphorical. Why didn't you consider another third option? This is why I said he should actually talk to scholars. Forget about me. I'm nobody. You should talk to actually reputable scholars who can explain this to you, that these are not the only two options, that you're setting up a false dichotomy, Dr. Brown. You see?
human eyes. It just means God's aware of what we're doing. Right. So they're saying, if you're willing to interpret this Quranic verse allegorically, why are you so quick to dismiss this hadith? So the rules we mentioned before, if a hadith, alleged hadith, contradicts the Quran, contradicts the establishment of the Prophet, contradicts first principles of reason, it can't be something the Prophet said. The difference between, let's say, a Muslim rationalist like the Mu'tazilites and a Sunni is not in that they disagree with the rules, it's that how much they're willing to, how much kind of charity they're willing to potentially give a hadith before they say this can't be the Sunnah of the Prophet. So someone like Mullah Ali Qari with the hadith of the beardless youth, he's willing to give out a lot of charity. He's saying maybe it was a dream. Zahabi, also Sunni, he's not so willing.
Yes.
Right. Sometimes, okay, so let me get back to your question, right? So here's this is why Sunni scholars focus on the isnad.
Right.
If you have the Quran, and if you understand the Quran through the Sunnah of the Prophet, it's very hard to know the difference between contradiction and explanation. Okay, so if I say, the Prophet said, for example, the Quran says that meta, carrion, meat of the dead animal, is prohibited.
He goes on to a different issue that's not really necessarily about Aqeedah, so I'm going to skip that.
The difference between contradiction and know the unseen, right? So, for example, if the second, we don't know the unseen. God and the Prophet know the unseen, right? So, for example, if the Prophet says,
now here's a comment where he mentions God and the Prophet know the unseen. It's just off the cuff, so maybe he slipped up. I don't know what he means by that, but for us, we believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows the unseen. And the only, in any context you could make that statement make sense of the Prophet knowing the unseen is only what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals to the Prophet of the unseen. But we don't believe that there's anything besides that that the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam has full access and knows everything in the unseen. And again, I'm not saying that Jonathan Brown is saying that, right? But the way he said it, it lacked context for him to really go into detail. So I don't know, maybe he can clear that up. I don't know what he believes exactly about the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam and the prophets in general and their access to the unseen. I don't know what his position is, but there are some extremely deviant and even kufri beliefs, not from him necessarily, but others who are proclaiming to be Sunni and where they make statements about the prophets and their access to knowledge of the unseen and all those things. So that's why when you say that, it's kind of like an alarm going off when we hear that, right? We want to know what actually is behind that statement. And I'm not making any judgments. I don't know what his position is, but he wasn't clear enough on that.
Islam says that on the day of judgment, we're going to see God. Like you see the full moon. This is hadith, very famous hadith in Sahih Bukhari and other books. Mu'tazilites would say, God, this is impossible. Again, God is in a box. So
this is the last hadith that we're going to talk about, where the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam said that on a day of judgment, we're going to see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The believers will see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Right, like a full moon is the example he gives.
Body is receiving it. It goes like you see the full moon. We're going to see God. Like you see the full moon. This is hadith, very famous hadith in Sahih Bukhari and other books. Mu'tazilites would say, God, this is impossible. Again, God is in a body. He's receiving. It goes against.
Again, if you see Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then he has to be in a body and he has to be like this and has to be like that, and putting all of these lawazim or entailments upon us that we don't necessarily accept. Right? Again, this is the methodology of the Asharis and the Mu'tazila.
Our theology, as we understand it as Muslims. Early Sunnis say, no, wait a second, listen, their judgment's a different universe. Like nothing we know it's a different creation. We have no, how are we going to, you're going to sit around, we're going to say us human beings are just going around trying to like milk camels and, get enough food to eat and raise our kids and stuff like that. We don't even know what's going on in the world around us. We're going to say what's possible and impossible in the next life. This is only God's knowledge. If God and the Prophet tell us something, we don't have a right to object.
There you go. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam tell us something and it's authentic, we don't have a right to reject. We don't reject. We don't make ta'wil. We don't go into making all these assumptions about if we accept it, then it must be like this, 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 and this. That's not the methodology of the Atharis and Ahl al-Hadith.
Of course, then some Sunni scholars, probably the majority, would say, okay, yes.
And now he says, of course, but some Sunni scholars, and probably the majority, say this. This is what he now gives the interpretation of us seeing, of the believer seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the afterlife, right? This is what his explanation now. The majority of Sunni scholars say this.
It's not, maybe you're not actually seeing God. Maybe God creates an image.
Maybe you're not actually seeing God. So now he's actually denying that we're actually going to see Allah. Right?
Image in your mind or something. So they reconcile. Yes. It's not, maybe you're not actually seeing God. Maybe God creates an image in your mind.
Maybe you're not actually seeing God. Maybe God creates an image in your mind. You see? This is what he's saying. You're not actually going to see God. It's actually like a distortion, because God is going to create an image in your mind. You're not actually seeing God, right? But wait, you had a problem with seeing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in a dream before. Now he's going to create an image in your mind when he's told you that you were going to see him? Wow.
Or something. So they reconcile it. So the second thing is, you're not actually seeing God. Maybe God creates an image in your mind or something. So they reconcile it.
So he said they reconcile it, as if he's agreeing with that. He's agreeing that that's the proper form of reconciliation, is to say that God creates an image in your mind. You see?
So the second thing is, the Prophet is telling us about things. We don't have the capacity to object. We don't have the knowledge to object.
Yes.
All right. So
he's saying we don't have the authority and the right to object, but in a sense, he's actually objecting because he's manipulating the text of the Qur'an and Sunnah. I have to be honest here. By saying, no, you're going to see him. Well, no, you actually, it says you're going to see Allah. It's clear as you see the moon. And then you say, no. What it actually means, you're not going to actually see God. Maybe he just creates an image in your mind. And that's how we get rid of these problems. Because of the tashbih that's already in his mind about all these assumptions that if you see God, then this means he's a body and he's like this and he's like this, all these nasty entailments that we don't necessarily accept. That's what's causing him to make ta'wil and say, oh, the majority of scholars. No, the majority of scholars don't hold this position. And that's why I'm showing his methodology and his understanding and the positions he's taking are clearly not with Imam Ahmed. It's clearly the methodology of the Asharis and the so-called, what he wants to call rationalists, even though they're not. And we show that they're not rational, right? The Mu'tazila.
If there's serious constraints on our ability to kind of examine the contents of these hadiths, what do? Well, we're going to look at the chain of transmission.
Well, no problem. If there's constraints, of course, we're always gonna look at the chain of transmission anyway. Okay. So that's the end of that video. As we can see here, 1 second here. Somebody say I'm clutching at straws. What? Tell me, what kind of straws am I clutching at? I mean, you should go back and watch the beginning of the video when I actually play, sorry, I don't play. I go to my Twitter page and show where I interacted with Jonathan Brown. And he does not actually explicitly, in fact, he admits that the views he expressed in the video are not the position of Imam Ahmed. And he says that he felt that he was right in what he said and that he should have actually stated that position, and that's basically his position. And when I asked him several times what his position is, whether or not he's an Ashari, he refused to answer. Right. And he made a joke about being in academia, that the academic departments that he works for, they don't really care if he's Ashari or Athari. Right. Let's see here. Somebody sent a super chat without a name, so I can't even, but Jazakallah khair. As Imam Alex said, Al-istiwa is known linguistically. The how is unknown. Belief in it is mandatory or wajib. And questions about it are innovation. And the ones with sickness in their hearts, nifaq, transgress. Yeah, this is well known. So, mashallah. Let's see. 1 second here. Anybody, let's see. Okay. There's no anthropomorphism. Again, that's your claim. 1 second. Yeah, so now I'm going to go on because he admitted that this is not the positions of Imam Ahmed. But now I'm going to go on to explain, well, not me. I'm going to let Sheikh Hatem al-Hajj do most of the explaining about Imam Bukhari and his position about a very key issue, and that's a distinction between the Atharis and all the other schools, right? Which is one of the main reasons why I'm an Athari, if people want to know. So let me share my screen here. Okay. And this, how long is this part? Let me just let you guys know. This part is going to be, 1 second. It's about 8 minutes or so. So it's not that long. All right. Yeah, it's about 8 minutes. Okay. Okay, here we go. This is from Blogging Theology, Brother Paul Williams' channel, which I've been on there before. I did a very long video on the logical problem of the Trinity, very detailed, that you guys can check out over there. Brother Paul has a lot of other interesting videos on there. He's had Dr. Jonathan Brown on there, but not for anything related to Aqeedah. But he had recently Sheikh Hatem al-Hajj on, and although I don't agree with everything that he said in both videos, I thought he was pretty fair and pretty accurate in representing the Athari position more broadly and Ibn Taymiyyah specifically. So anyway, he mentions and discusses a key issue here, which is about the volitional attributes or the actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and how they're understood in the different schools. Okay. So this is very important issue because it's all over the Qur'an, and especially in the month of Ramadan. I don't know how anybody can read the Qur'an and not agree with the Athari position. It's just so obvious. But anyway, here we go.
So here's the problem. New creations without new cause. Here is the dilemma. Okay, so basically the rational theologians and Aristotle, they agree. Aristotelian philosophers, they agree.
So agree. Again, he's calling them the rational theologians. I don't like this categorizing it that way because, and I'm not taking a shot at Sheikh Hatem because I respect him, but I don't like that categorization because it makes it seem like they're rational, and if you don't hold their view, you're irrational, which clearly he doesn't mean, he doesn't believe and he doesn't mean, but it could give a false impression to some of the viewers. Okay,
that new things or new events cannot subsist in God.
So this is the claim of the Mutakallimin, that new events or new actions cannot subsist in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And we clearly disagree with this. The Mataridis have a position, the Ash'aris have a position, the philosophers, he doesn't really go into detail, but they've got some other nonsense. But anyway, here we go.
But there are new creations. What do we do about this? So the Mataridis, they basically came up with an 8th essential attribute.
So the question is basically this: if we have new things that are happening, so new events in the world that are happening, and new things are being created, right? And yet we're saying, or some people are saying, the mutakallimin are saying that hawadith, or these emergent events, these new events, can't subsist in God, right? Then what's the explanation for these things that are newly being created, right? Because you have creation on the one side, and these new things that are happening, events, and nothing, according to them, is happening with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But if he's the one creating it, what's the explanation? You have this gap in between. You have God on one side, so to speak, and nothing happening with him. And then you have all these things happening in real time, right? These events happening. And there's this gap in between. So how do we explain this, right? This is the problem that the mutakallimin have.
Of God. So in addition to this, came up with an 8th essential. So
first he's going to describe the Maturidi position, which basically they assert rather than 7 essential attributes, they add an additional one, which is called takween. And it's basically an umbrella term. And it's not just him explaining it this way. Other Maturidis have explained it this way. And even Dr. Ramon Harvey, who I've had on my channel as an interview, explains it this way, that the attribute of takween for the Maturidis is basically an umbrella term or an umbrella attribute for all of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's actions, okay? And it's eternal.
Maturidis, they basically came up with an 8th essential attribute of God. So in addition to the 7, you know, life and knowledge and power and hearing and seeing and kalam and will, they added takween, which is Genesis, a sort of eternal umbrella attribute for all actions that will come afterwards. The Ash'aris argued that those actions are not attributes, and they do not subsist in God, but rather the attribute of qudra in those actions that will come afterwards. A sort of eternal umbrella attribute for all actions that will come afterwards. The Ash'aris argued that those.
So that's the Maturidi position. You have takween, which is this eternal attribute, which is all of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's actions wrapped into this attribute, right? But then on the other side, you have all of these temporal happenings in the world, all of these actions, and they believe that everything is created by Allah. So you have this gap in between, and what's the explanation for that, right? And that's why the slide is called New Creations Without New Cause, right? Because you have an eternal cause and you have these temporal effects, but you have a gap in between, a time gap in between, and no explanation for it, right? And there's no action of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at that time actually creating it. Now he goes on to explain the Ash'ari position.
Actions are not attributes. The Ash'aris argued that those actions are not attributes.
So they go further, the Ash'aris. They say that the attributes of God or the actions of God, so things that he does, him speaking, him creating, him providing mercy to people in time, they're not actually actions, right? They're not actually attributes of Allah, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's actions are not attributes for the Ash'aris, in the sense that they do not subsist in his that or his essence, right? He has ipseity, which is a technical term, but just means his essence, right? So this is what the Ash'aris believe. And I'll explain in more detail what they believe after he's done.
And they do not subsist in God, but rather the attribute of qudra, which is eternal, has actualization relationality. Ta'alluq tanjizi. That's my best translation for ta'alluq tanjizi. with its different actualizations in the particulars. To others, neither proposition solves the problem.
So that's the Ashari position in a I don't know if it's a simpler way, but it's simpler for me to understand. For the Asharis, they do not believe that any of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's actions are attributes because they don't subsist in his that or his essence, right? For them, the act of Allah is the effect. So the action is equal to the effect. They're not two different things. You don't have the actor or the agent, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the action of the agent, and the effect. You don't have those. Typically, that's how we think of cause and effect. You have the agent, in this case, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You have the act of the agent, and you have the effect of the agent, which is produced by the action of that agent. The Ash'aris don't believe that. They smash all of them into one. For them, the act is the effect. So the action of Allah is the thing itself, right? So, I mean, you can give any example that you want. Let's say this thing being created, right? This case. This being created, because also the Ash'aris, and this is the strange part, they're occasionalists, which means they don't believe in what's called secondary causation. Everything is a direct creation of God. Me talking and speaking and doing things right now, I don't have any volition for the Ash'aris, right? And I hate to say it, but I'm just a puppet, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pulling the strings. It complicates the issue even more, which he didn't mention, occasionalism, because everything is supposed to be an act of God, but yet he's frozen. He's like a frozen picture, astaghfirullah, and I don't want to say it this way, but it's like a frozen picture. So he's doing everything, but he's also not doing anything at the same time. This is the contradiction. It doesn't make any sense. So I'm not doing anything. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is doing everything right now, but he's also not doing anything. This is the absurdity in the view, to be quite frank. So for them, the act is the effect. So the action of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala creating this is the thing itself. They're not two different things. You don't have the agent, which is Allah, the act, and the effect, which is produced by the act. They're not two different things. The act equals the effect. And some people might be thinking, Brother Jake, what are you saying? And I'm telling you, that's the point. It makes no sense. Typically, a cause, right, is the cause of an effect. The cause and the act, and it produces the effect. For them, the action is the effect, which makes no sense whatsoever. Okay? Yeah, actually, somebody repent of the Trinity. He says this reminds me of the debate Bob had with Hashem at Speaker's Corner. Actually, if you look, if you look at my discussion with Bob, you'll see that this next section here, right? You'll see that this next section here is relevant, because what we believe about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's actions, right, is relevant to my conversation that I had with Bob, the builder, in Speaker's Corner last year. Anyway, let me continue with the video.
Aristotle, for instance, Ibn Rushd, for instance, says the problem is not the lag between the pre-eternal will and the creation of the universe, but rather between the act of creating by God, by the creator, and the created coming into existence, particularly if the creator is omnipotent.
Okay, so what he's saying there, now he's quoting Ibn Rushd, who was a philosopher, right? And what he's saying is the problem with both positions, right? Neither position solves the problem. Why? Because the action of God, he's saying the problem is between the act of creating by the creator, which is supposed to be eternal. So the act of creating is eternal, and the created thing coming into existence. So me being created in my mother's womb, for example, that's something that happens in time. But the gap between, there's a lag between the act of the creator and the effect, which is me coming into existence or being created. If Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is and the creator is omnipotent, he's all powerful, and whatever he wills comes into being, then how do you explain the lag or the time gap between Allah supposedly performing the act and the effect being thousands or millions or billions or whatever, however many years, depending on what it is, right, into the future? No sense. There's no connection. You have an eternal action with a temporal effect that happens so later, and there's no connection between them, really, right? There's no legitimate explanation for it, why it is the case that this comes into being when it does, right? And that's because for them, there's no real difference between the act and the effect. The act actually is the effect, right? That's why for the Asharis, it doesn't subsist in Allah. It doesn't subsist in Allah because the act is the effect, which is the created thing, which exists outside of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's essence. You see? It's just mind-boggling.
So the omnipotent creator, his act of creation should result in the created thing coming into existence immediately. And
in other words, what he's saying, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala acts, the thing that his action should produce the creation immediately. So how do you say he acted and then the effect or the creation didn't come out? It's like you're saying he did something, but he didn't. It's either he did something, but he didn't really do something, or if he did something, how come his action didn't produce that created thing? If he's truly omnipotent, whatever he does, it should immediately produce the effect. But in their case, it doesn't. There's a gap in between, and there's no explanation for it, right? So all their positions are bottom. And now we're going to show they clearly go against the Qur'an. And I'm going to give a backstory as to why they take this position. Because they think it's based on an aqli or rational principle, which it's not. You see? And they're rejecting the clear verses of the Qur'an, I have to say. So, I mean, we'll see in a second here from Sheikh Hatem what he explains.
Here is the Quranic description of God. So the Qur'an describes a God who engages with his temporal creations time and time again.
And this is the clear point. Anybody open up the Qur'an describes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as a being, a God that engages with his creation time and time again in time, right? And this is why it has to do with the issue of speech, the kalam Allah as well, whether or not Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually speaks, which I'll go through later.
He wills. قُلِ اللَّهُ يَبْدَأُ الْخَلْقَ ثُمَّ يُعِيدُ. Say Allah begins creation and then repeats it.
See, notice that. Listen to the verse of the Quran, chapter 10, verse 34. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins creation. So he creates and then he repeats it. And then, thumma, then he repeats it. There's a before and after. He does one thing, he creates, and then he does it again. Right? One eternal action and a gap in between. And the act is the effect and all these kind of things. No, there's the agent, the creator, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He begins, he creates, right? And he performs an action and then he repeats that action. And another thing comes based on what he created. See?
Every day he's bringing about a new affair.
Every day, right? Every day. He is bringing about a new matter, a new thing. There's a new thing that he's doing. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is performing new actions, right?
Perhaps Allah will originate after that a different matter.
And this wouldn't make any sense because for the Asharis and the Mataridis, he can't do one thing after another. So how will Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala originate something after something else? For them, he can't do that. He can't do something, create something, and then create something else. And we'll see why they have a problem with that in a second.
It is he who created for you all that which is on the earth then, and that is why I colored then differently. Then, every then in the Quran, when it comes to the actions of God, is talking about the before and after. One thing after another, one action after another.
Yeah, that's key. Thumma. What he says, when you see thumma in the Quran with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's actions, it's one after another. So now he's going to quote from a scholar, Allama Muhammad Anwar Shah al-Kashmiri, who's a Mataridi scholar, who is at least honest, and we'll see in representing what Ibn Taymiyyah's position is. He actually admits that the language of the Quran and Sunnah actually support him. And then he admits that Imam Bukhari had the same view. And admits another thing, that the commentators, the so-called the Ash'aris and the Maturidis and people who want to claim Imam Bukhari, right? They try to reinterpret his statement, but his statement is so clear. If they would just be honest and say, look, as this scholar is saying, that Imam Bukhari is on the side of the Atharis. And this is why I played this section here, because although it's not directly related to, in a sense it is, because one of the hadith that Jonathan Brown brought up was Nuzul, right? And different what are called the actions that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala performs. So in a sense it is related, right? And he said, well, Imam Ahmed didn't agree, but it's debatable with Imam Bukhari. Well, I'm going to show you here that Imam Bukhari clearly didn't have the Ash'ari position or Maturidi position on this at all, right? So anyway, we'll see that this Maturidi scholar actually admits this, okay?
So, describing Ibn Taymiyyah's point here, I wanted to basically quote a contemporary Maturidi great scholar, Allama Muhammad Anwar Shah al-Kashmiri, who was, actually very inspiring, because that's the way you engage in discourse about matters of creed. Very respectful, but he's not in agreement with Imam Taymiyyah. But he's saying, regarding the position of Al-Hafiz Ibn Taymiyyah, may Allah be pleased with him, radiyallahu anhu, which is something we use for the Sahaba, but he uses for major scholars. He uses it for major scholars. He says he believes that the temporal attributes subsist in the Creator.
So he's explaining, he's starting off by explaining Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah's position. What is his position about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's actions? That they subsist in the Creator and are not created, right? So this is another important issue, and this is what is relevant to my discussion. If you go back, Mr. Repent of the Trinity, and you look at my discussion with Bob the Builder from last year, it has to do with this, right? So as the Atharis, we believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's actions, right, can be in time, can be new, right, or have a beginning, and yet they are not created. And as I was explaining, this is also, and this flew over so many people's heads, this is also the position of many Eastern Orthodox. Those that follow Gregory Palamas, that's what his position was. And he was arguing against those like the Catholics at that time, the Western Church, and Thomas Aquinas, and I showed this directly, is against this, because Thomas Aquinas says anything that has a beginning is created. Therefore, you can't say that God's actions, if they have a beginning, are uncreated or ghair makhluk, right? Uncreated, other than created. Where it's our position that God's actions, he can act in time, he can have new actions, and yet they're not makhluk, they're not created. Why? Because they subsist in him and they're his actions, right? And he'll go on to explain this.
And are not created. He claims, clearly he's not saying that he basically will buy it. So he claims that this is the way of the predecessors.
So he's saying that he's saying that Ibn Taymiyyah is claiming that this is the way of the predecessors, the way of the Salaf, which I don't know. On one hand, he's saying this is what they claim, but then on the other hand, he later admits that this was Imam Bukhari's position. So I don't know. But anyway.
He denies the notion that the occurrence of these attributes in the eternal is impossible. He also distinguishes between the created and the temporal, with the created being separate. And that's important. The attributes of God cannot be separate from God, which will come back when we discuss Jesus, peace be upon him. So with the created being separate, so the entire world is temporal and created, unlike...
Recordings just got better.
Oh, man.
Hey, it's Dana from StreamYard. I'm so excited to announce.
Like the attributes, they are temporal, but not created, the actions of God.
Exactly. The actions of God are temporal, but not created. That's our position.
They subsist in the Creator exalted.
And by the way, as I was saying, that is the position of Gregory Palamas, that God can have new actions, or what they call energies, right? But yet they're not created. Okay? But that's directly against Thomas Aquinas. And some people trying to make them together. It's not going to work, my Catholic and Christian friends. You cannot make Thomas Aquinas and Gregory Palamas go together. I'm sorry, friends. Direct contradiction. Palamas says that some of God's actions or energies are temporal. They have a beginning and are not created. Thomas Aquinas directly says that anything that has a beginning is created, including God's actions. You see? So, and I'm not saying, of course, we don't believe in the Trinity. We don't believe in a lot of other things that Gregory Palamas believes. People misunderstood. I'm simply saying in this specific thing, Ibn Taymiyyah and our position of the Ethnies is in line with, on just this small part, the Eastern Orthodox and what Gregory Palamas says, that we believe that things that have a beginning can be uncreated or not created, specifically the actions of God. Just, I'm saying on that one point, that's what we're in agreement. However, the Asharis are on the side of Thomas Aquinas and saying anything that has a beginning is necessarily created. And so they don't leave room for God's actions.
So, Al-Allama Muhammad Anwar Shaykh al-Kashmiri says the language supports him. And I love this because, you know, you do not have to basically deny your opponent every argument. Conceding some points is not a problem. You could still come back and reject his conclusion, but concede some points so that the discussion is objective and sensible. So he says the language supports him, for it is said that Zayd is described by standing up, but we cannot say that he...
So notice what he's saying, and what Sheikh Hatem is pointing out is, listen, in these discussions and debates, listen, you don't need to be bothered on every single point. You can grant some points to us when it's so clear. And even though this scholar doesn't agree with us, he's a Mataridi, he's admitting the language supports him. Listen very closely to that.
So he says the language supports him.
The language supports him, meaning the language supports Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah. And now he gives an example.
For it is said that Zayd is described by standing up, but we cannot say that he created that. He created his standing.
Right. It says that for if Zayd, right, is described as standing up, right, we cannot say that just because he stood up that we can describe it as being created, right? That this action, that we cannot say that he created that. He didn't create that action in that way, right? So that's what he's explaining, that the language does support him. And now he gives another example about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being characterized by descending, nuzul. So this is why it's relevant to what Dr. Jonathan Brown mentioned, as I was telling you guys earlier in the previous video, when he was talking about the Hadith of Nuzul, right? He goes on to mention that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is characterized by nuzul, but we do not say that he created it, right?
it's an attribute. Zayd stands up. It's an attribute of Zayd. He doesn't make the standing.
Right. It's an attribute of Zayd. He doesn't create or make the standing, right? We don't speak like that.
Similarly, we can say that Allah is characterized by descending, but we cannot say that He created that. Imam al-Bukhari, and that is Sheikh Muhammad Anwar Shah Kashmiri, also conceding one more point. Imam al-Bukhari held a similar view and stated that Allah is characterized by temporal attributes, but the commentators have reinterpreted his statement. Which statement is he referring to? This statement that Imam Taymiyyah.
Exactly. So let me just go back here, because notice what he said is Imam Bukhari held a similar view and stated that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is characterized by temporal attributes, but the commentators, meaning people who followed and tried to reinterpret his statement, because it's so clearly against their creed and what they believe, that they couldn't accept it. They had to reinterpret his words, right? We don't have to reinterpret it because it's in line with what Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah is saying.
Statement. Which statement is he referring to?
And so now he's going to go to the statement of Imam Bukhari, which Ibn Taymiyyah mentions several times in his text.
This statement that Imam Taymiyyah at least repeated 7 times in his books of Imam Bukhari. He says, this is the action of the Lord, blessed and exalted be He, and His command, the Lord, with His attributes, actions, and commands, is the creator and generator and is not created. So the attributes, actions of God are not created, part of God, subsisting God. And the result of His action, command, creation, and composition is created and generated. So there is a separation here between the cause, the effect, and the act. Imam Taymiyyah is saying the only way we may be able to not concede to the philosophers the proposition about the beginning, Imam is created.
Okay, so let's break this down, because people need to understand this. This is and I was going to say it a certain way, but I don't want to say it this way. This completely destroys the Ashari position. This is what you guys need to understand. Completely destroys the Ashari position. Why? Because remember what I said before, that the Asharis are saying that the action is equal to the effect, that the act and the effect, meaning the act of God and the created thing, are one and the same. They're not two different things. They're the same thing, right? And they say that the action is created because, why is the action created? Because the action is the effect and the effect is created, right? What does Imam Bukhari say? This is the action of the Lord, blessed and exalted be He, and His command. The Lord, with His attributes, His actions and commands, is the creator and generator and is not created. So what is he telling you? His actions are not created. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's actions themselves are not created. They're uncreated. And then he says, and the result of His action, command, creation, and composition is created and generated. You see? So what does that show you? Why is this you guys really need to focus on this. This is a complete refutation of the Ashari position. Imam Bukhari could not be in line with the Ashari Aqeedah on this point, which is one of the key differences between us Atharis and Asharis. Why? He is saying clearly here that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is an agent. So you have the agent, the creator, you have the actions, which are the acts of that creator, and you have the result of the action. 3 different things. You have the creator, which is Allah. You have the action of Allah, And then you have the effect of that action, the result of the action, which is the thing that is created. And they're three things: the act, the agent, Allah, the act itself, and the effect which is produced by that act. So that's already a refutation of the Ash'aris, because they believe that the action is equal to the effect. So it can't possibly be, you can't possibly reinterpret this to be in line with what the Ash'aris are saying. That's the first thing. Second thing, not only does he make a distinction between the action and the effect, he also is saying that the actions of Allah are uncreated, right? They're غير مخلوق. They're not created. But what? The result of the action is created, is makhluk. So Allah's action is not created, but the effect, the result of the action is created. That's not what the Ash'aris say. The Ash'aris say that the action is the effect, and because the action is the effect, the action and the effect are created. They're makhluk. Right? So it's in direct conflict with what Imam Bukhari is saying, and that's why Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah repeats this phrase several times in his works, and that's why even someone who is opposed to the creed of the Atharis, this scholar which we just mentioned, he has to admit that the language of the Qur'an and Sunnah support Ibn Taymiyyah and the Athari view, and he has to admit that Imam Bukhari in the statement is representing the same view, and he has to admit that the commentators didn't like it, the Ash'aris and the Mataridis, so they had to reinterpret Imam Bukhari's statement because it goes against their fundamental Aqeedah. You see? So this is a very clear and different position of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah, right? And this is why I said to you guys very clearly, okay, that this is one, for me personally, this is one of the main reasons why I could never be an Ash'ari and why I am an Athari, because we are the only school of Aqeedah that makes sense and is in line with the Qur'an and Sunnah. Time and time again, Allah says he initiated creation, right? So he created something, he originated it, and then he does it again. Thumma. After that, he does it again. He repeats it. You see? That doesn't make any sense. Now, why is it the case, right? Because we have all of these examples, right? We have all of these examples in the Quran, right? We have all of these examples. One second. We have all of these examples in the Quran where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is doing one action after another, including him speaking. And this is one of the problems that the Ash'aris and Mataridis have a problem with Allah speaking, right? All of this goes back to what they think is an aqli reason, which is they say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot be ascribed in any manner with time and change. And we don't necessarily use these words. We don't have to, right? But what their concern is, if we say that Allah does one thing and then he did something else, then he changed and he's in time. And anything that has hawadith in it, right, or originating events, it itself must be hawadith. It itself must be originated. And this is one of the ways in which they try to prove that God exists with the kalam cosmological argument. And one of the things that Ibn Taymiyyah mentions is we don't necessarily have a problem with the kalam cosmological argument, right? We have a problem with their arguments or their justifications for the argument itself, for the premises, right? In other words, this claim that anything that has hawadith or it can be ascribed with originating events, it itself must be originated, right? This is their claim. So God can't do one thing and then do something else, because if he does, that means that he's created and therefore he can't be God, right? So let's give the example, and I'm going to close out with this, right? Every Muslim should know the story of Musa alayhi salam in the Quran, And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke directly to him, right, which it mentions in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke to Musa alayhi salam, and he said, right, he says something, and then Musa alayhi salam responds back, and then Allah says something else after that, right? So it's happening in time. Allah says this, then Musa alayhi salam responds, right? And then Allah says something else. Now the Asharis and the Mataridis cannot accept that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala literally spoke, because one of the reasons why is that if he did this, then he's acting in time. He said one letter and one word, and then he said something else, then Musa responded, then he responded back. And that contradicts their whole idea of a completely timeless, basically frozen picture that they have of Allah, right? But this is why Shaykh al-Islam, who he quotes Imam Ahmed, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks what? By his will and power. He speaks by his will and power, meaning it's volitional, right? And what does that mean? That it happens in time, that he can speak, right? He can really speak to Musa alayhi salam, say something, Musa responds, and then he can say something else. It goes against their creed. That's why some of them make ta'wil of it, and they say, oh, well, it wasn't actually Allah that spoke to Musa. It was an angel, right? It was an angel that spoke to him, or it wasn't really his speech. He created something, just like what he was talking about before. Dr. Jonathan Brown was talking about with, we don't actually see Allah. We see a creation. Allah creates something in our mind that we see. We don't actually see Allah. Astaghfirullah, right? So you have to understand the background of why these mutakallimin have to reject the text, the clear text of the Quran and Sunnah, even when they admit that the language is in agreement with us, even when they admit that Imam Bukhari and members of the Salaf agree with us, right? They have to go against the text and the Salaf because of their own faulty, what they think are actually aqli principles, which they're not, right? Of saying, well, anything with hawadith must be hadith itself, right? Anything that has origination within it has to be originated itself. Where did you get this principle from? It's not mentioned in the Quran and Sunnah, and it's not necessitated by anything, any aqli principle. They just made it up. And this is the problem with us, because we don't believe that the texts go against reason, but we believe that what they think is rational itself is not rational. That's why we can establish, one, it goes against the language and against the text, and we can also establish it goes against reason, which I just tried to show earlier with this issue. You see? And this is a clear issue, and people really need to understand this issue. And I'm probably going to make future videos on it to drive the point home even further. That the position of Imam Bukhari on the distinction between something that is temporal and something that's created, right? Because he says that all of Allah's actions are uncreated, and yet they happen in time. You see? But yet, and why is that the case? Because they're Allah's actions and they subsist in him. It doesn't make sense to say, I created my own action of standing up. No, that's what we don't say that. It's an attribute of me when I stand up, right? That's not the way we speak. You see? So likewise, we don't say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's actions are created. We say they're an attribute of his, attributes of his, and they're uncreated. But that which is produced by his actions, those creations are, or those effects are created. They are makhluk, right? And as I said, the reason why the Asharis have this position is because they cannot accept a God, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that actually engages with his creation, that can perform one action and then do something else. They have this idea, astaghfirullah, and I have to keep saying it, of like a frozen picture, right? Allah, and it's crazy because they don't believe in secondary causation. They believe that they're occasionalists. So Allah is pulling all the strings. He's doing everything, right? I don't really have my own real actions. I don't have any causal power in any way, according to them. So Allah is doing everything, but yet he's not doing anything because he's not doing anything in time. So what's the explanation? You have this eternal cause, right? And then you have the effect, which is happening in time, and there's a gap between. But if he is all powerful, if he's omnipotent, then when he acts, we should expect that the effect comes right away. But for the Ashari, you don't have that. You have the eternal action, and you have the effect, which comes thousands or millions or whatever years later. And there's a gap in between and no explanation, right? So that's why Sheikh Hatem al-Hajj said you have new events without a new cause. You don't have an actual cause. You have these things happening without a cause. There's no real explanation. Okay? So I know a lot of this second half I focused on this video, but it's to show, right, that Dr. Jonathan Brown, I'm sorry to say, Imam Bukhari was not in line, right, with the Ash'aris on this position. And one of the issues mentioned was Nuzul, right, in the actual text, right? So again, I'm not making this video simply to attack Jonathan Brown. That's not my point at all. I'm not making this video to simply attack Jonathan Brown. If he wants to be an Ash'ari, that's his opinion. He can do whatever he wants. Nobody's holding the proverbial gun to his head. That's not the point. The point is, if he's a public figure and he's making statements in videos like this, he should be at the very least clear about his position. Are you an Ash'ari or not? I gave him several chances to respond on the thread, and he refused to respond. Right, but the views that he's representing in that are distinctively Ash'ari. They clearly are, right? And he misrepresented Imam Ahmed and Imam Bukhari, and he took it back and he said, "Oh yeah, you're right. That's not Imam Ahmed's position, but it's debatable about Imam Bukhari." No, it's not debatable about him. He didn't hold that position, right? And he wasn't on the manhaj of the Ash'aris, right? So with that being said, guys, I know that I spoke a bit passionately. Again, if Dr. Brown or any of his followers watch this video, it's nothing personal with him. I'm just seeing what I think is his view. And it seems that I have to say in conclusion that it looks like Dr. Jonathan A.C. Brown is an Ash'ari, right? And if that's his position, he should make it clear, because he's online and he's claiming that he's, giving presentations and he's a public speaker and teaching people. He should be clear about his position. In our deen, if you're going to claim to be an academic or scholar, you have to make your positions clear. You see? And he's seemed to refuse to do that. But it's clear that he's on the manhaj of the Ash'aris. He's not in line, and he admits that it was not Imam Ahmed's position, which is a shame, because he claims to be a Hanbali in fiqh, but yet he's not following his Imam when it comes to Aqeedah. It's a bit strange, right? And I know that there have been some Hanbalis, very minority, who have been Ash'aris in the past, but for the most part, I don't understand why he would be Hanbali in fiqh and want to not accept the Imam's positions when it comes to Aqeedah. Anyway, with that being said, I used Sheikh Hatem al-Hajj's video as a way to explain some things to you guys. Somebody's saying, can we re-upload your stuff? You can message me, because Turkish Skeptic, I'm not really familiar with you. Sorry, brother. You can message me, and we can talk about it. But anyway, I hope that you guys enjoyed this video. I hope that this will be beneficial for the people who are watching live and that may watch in the future. Again, it's nothing personal with Jonathan Brown, but I'm putting forward to show very clearly why it is the case that I hold this position, and very clearly why I think Jonathan Brown is incorrect and he's misguided when it comes to these issues. And I think that he needs to talk to reputable ethicity scholars in order to understand what our positions actually are, because I don't feel they were being represented properly, and hopefully to embrace those positions. But if he doesn't, then that's his prerogative. He can do whatever he wants. I hope that everybody has a blessed month of Ramadan. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala accept your fasts and your your prayers, and forgive us of our sins. Ameen, Ya Rab. And for this goes for Jonathan and everybody. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala first guide me and guide us all. And if anything I said was incorrect, it was from myself or the shaitan, and I seek forgiveness for that. So I hope that you guys find benefit in this. And once again, consider hitting the like button, subscribe if you enjoy it. If you don't, hit the thumbs down, unsubscribe. You already know how I explain it and how I do it over here. If you guys like it, you know, help promote the channel if you can. If you don't like it, then you don't have to be here. Nobody's forcing you guys to come here. And if you guys want to support the channel, as I mentioned before, the best place to try to support me is on this GoFundMe page. That's the best way to support my work. It's pinned in the chat. You can see it at the top of the live chat. It's pinned. So if you click that link, you can give a one-time donation, and it helps actually, you know, give me some time in order to do this stuff, because you guys don't know, but I actually have a regular job, right? So I'm doing this stuff when I have time, as much as I can. So any support is welcome. And people were complaining about my audio and even video. I'm using a new video camera, but I don't know why. It looks clear on my end, but then when it gets uploaded, it doesn't always look as clear. So I don't know what's going on. But anyway, guys, I hope that you guys enjoyed this, and I will see you all soon. Well, actually, yeah, to make it clear, I won't probably be doing a live video for some time. Maybe not for the rest of the month of Ramadan. Maybe I'll do one video, but I'm going to stay away from some of this more contentious issues and debates and stuff like that. But I do have some videos that are being uploaded that are from before Ramadan, discussions with Christians and things like that. So those will be uploaded from Clubhouse if you're used to those Clubhouse discussions. But in terms of live videos, I probably won't be doing anything. Maybe one more video during Ramadan, maybe some Qur'an recitation or something like that, something different. But other than that, guys, I appreciate all of you watching and your continued support. And I'll see you all again next time, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.